Some cars are fast, some cars are beautiful, and some cars are so strange that it's difficult to believe they were ever built at all. From cars small enough to carry into buildings to vehicles that became famous for defying common sense, these are some of the weirdest automobiles ever created. PLP-50. There is a point at which a car becomes so small that the definition of car starts to feel generous. The PLP-50 reaches that point and crosses it entirely. Built on the Isle of Man in 1962 by the Peel Engineering Company, it measures 54 inches long, shorter than most office desks, weighs 130 pounds, and is powered by a 49 cubic centimeter engine producing 2 horsepower. It has 1 door, 1 headlight, 1 windshield wiper, and no reverse gear. When the driver needed to turn around, they got out, lifted the rear of the vehicle by a handle mounted on the back, and physically rotated it to face the other direction. The entire car was small enough to be picked up and carried into a building. Several owners did exactly that rather than look for parking. The Guinness World Records certified it as the smallest production car ever built, a title it has held for over 60 years without serious competition. Only 50 were originally manufactured. In 2010, production resumed for a new generation of buyers who wanted the experience of driving something so small it barely qualifies as a vehicle. What they got was precisely that. A machine that redefined the lower boundary of what a car could be, and proved that the boundary was considerably lower than anyone had previously imagined. But being ridiculously small isn't the only way a car can be strange. Sometimes the strangest vehicles exist because of a loophole that should never have worked in the first place. Reliant Robin. Britain once had a law that classified any 3-wheeled vehicle as a motorcycle, regardless of what it looked like or how it drove. The Reliant Robin was built entirely around that law. 2 wheels at the rear, 1 at the front, a body that looked like a conventional small car, and a legal classification that allowed anyone with a motorcycle license but not a full car license to drive it on public roads. For drivers who had failed their car test or who simply could not afford the full licensing process, the Robin was the only car-shaped object legally available to them. It sold 300,000 units on the strength of that loophole alone. The vehicle itself was functional in the narrow sense that it moved in the intended direction most of the time. Taking a corner was never guaranteed to end well. The single front wheel and the weight distribution it created gave the Robin a relationship with physics that required constant management from the driver. Tipping over was not a theoretical risk, but a documented reality captured on film so many times that it became the vehicle's most recognizable characteristic. The Top Gear episode in which Jeremy Clarkson demonstrated this required multiple attempts, not because it was difficult to roll a Robin, but because it was difficult to stop rolling it long enough to film the next take. If the Robin proved that legal classifications can create unusual vehicles, the next car proved that desperation can create them too. Because one of the strangest cars BMW ever built is also one of the most important, BMW Isetta. The BMW Isetta entered production in 1955 at a moment when BMW was in genuine financial difficulty and needed a vehicle that could be built cheaply, run economically, and sold to a population still recovering from the material deprivations of the Second World War. What resulted was a car with a front opening door, the entire front of the vehicle, including the steering wheel and dashboard, swinging outward to allow entry, a bubble-shaped body that gave it the nickname it is remembered by, and a 250cc motorcycle engine producing 13 horsepower that nonetheless made it the best-selling single-cylinder car in the world. It was 5 feet long. It had a turning radius so small it could perform a U-turn in a standard lane. It had a sunroof as standard because the alternative, a car this small with no means of ventilation, was not survivable in summer. The Isetta helped keep BMW financially afloat during one of the most difficult periods in the company's history. The revenues from its production kept the company solvent long enough to develop the vehicles that would define its reputation for the following 7 decades. The car that looks most like a joke in BMW's history is the car that ensured BMW's history continued. With over 161 0 units produced across multiple countries, it demonstrated that the minimum viable car was considerably smaller and considerably more peculiar than the automobile industry had previously been willing to explore. Not every strange car earns its reputation through engineering. Some earn it the moment people look at them. Fiat Multipla. The Fiat Multipla is not weird because of what it does. It is weird because of what it looks like, and what it looks like is a car that was designed by two different teams who never met and whose work was assembled into a single vehicle without anyone noticing the discontinuity. The upper half is a conventional people carrier, reasonably proportioned, functional, unremarkable. The lower half is a different vehicle entirely, wider and more aggressively styled, with a secondary set of headlights positioned low on the bumper that give the front of the car a four-eyed expression that automotive journalists struggled to describe without resorting to comparisons that were unkind to the car. It appeared on virtually every list of the ugliest cars ever made from the moment it launched in 1998 until it was redesigned in 2004 into something more conventional and considerably less interesting. What those lists consistently missed was that the Multipla was genuinely innovative beneath its extraordinary exterior. 6 seats and 2 rows of 3, a flat floor that maximized interior space relative to exterior dimensions, and an ergonomic layout that outperformed virtually every competitor in practical usability. It was a brilliant car that looked like a mistake. Whether it was ahead of its time or simply wrong is a question the automotive industry never fully settled before moving on. And then there are vehicles that are strange for an entirely different reason, not because they were practical, not because they were innovative, but simply because somebody decided they should exist. Phone car. The phone car is exactly what it sounds like and requires very little explanation, beyond the fact that someone built it and someone else drove it. A full-size replica of a 1950s desk telephone mounted on a custom chassis. The phone car was created as a promotional vehicle and subsequently driven on public roads in multiple countries by its various owners over the decades. It stands approximately 15 feet tall, has a functional handset, and moves at speeds that suggest the engineering priority was visual impact rather than performance. It is not strictly speaking a production vehicle, a technological achievement, or a contribution to automotive history. It is a car shaped like a telephone, and it exists because a person with sufficient resources and a particular sense of humor decided that it should. The phone car represents a category of automotive weirdness that has nothing to do with engineering ambition or commercial calculation. It exists purely as an act of will, a monument to the fact that if you have enough money and enough workshop space, you can build a car shaped like anything you want, and someone somewhere will pay attention to it. As unusual as that sounds, the next vehicle attempted something far more ambitious than looking strange, because some engineers weren't satisfied with building a car that looked different. They wanted to build a car that could do something cars were never supposed to do. Amphicar. The Amphicar was built in Germany between 1961 and 1968 on the premise that the distinction between a road and a waterway was a problem worth engineering around. It drove on land as a conventional car, poorly by most accounts, with handling that its owners described as approximate and a top speed of 70 miles per hour that required optimism to achieve. It floated on water as a boat, also poorly, with a top water speed of 7 knots that put it firmly in the category of things that cross rivers, rather than things that navigate them. It was often jokingly described as the world's fastest car on water and the world's fastest boat on land, a dual distinction that its manufacturer presented as an achievement rather than an admission. 3,878 were built and sold, making it the only civilian amphibious car ever produced in meaningful quantities. Lyndon B. Johnson owned one and famously used it to terrify guests at his Texas ranch by pointing it at a lake at full speed, then shouting that the brakes had failed as it entered the water and continued moving. The guests who knew about the Amphicar laughed. The guests who did not had a story to tell for the rest of their lives. The car was discontinued because it met neither road safety regulations nor maritime requirements in any country that cared about either. It succeeded anyway, which is the most honest measure of how much people wanted a car that drove into water. Some vehicles tried to combine cars and boats. The next one was built for an entirely different purpose. Not transportation, not practicality, but attracting attention. Upside Down Ford. The Upside Down Ford is a stunt vehicle built on the premise that everything structurally necessary for a car to function can be inverted without preventing it from functioning. The body of a Ford sits literally upside down on a custom chassis, the roof facing the road, the undercarriage facing the sky, with the mechanical components relocated to make the inverted configuration drivable at low speeds. It was built for promotional and exhibition purposes, and has been driven in public appearances where its primary function is to make observers question what they are looking at before realizing that the answer is straightforwardly a car that is upside down. The engineering required to make an inverted vehicle structurally sound and mechanically functional is more substantial than the joke premise suggests. The weight distribution, the exhaust routing, the cooling system, and the driver visibility all require solutions that do not exist in any manual. It is a car built purely to be looked at, and it succeeds completely at that objective. Nothing else on this list is quite as simple in its ambition or quite as immediate in its effect on anyone who sees it approaching. But as strange as an upside-down car sounds, the next vehicle attempted something people had been imagining for more than a century. A car that could fly. Terrafugia Transition. The Terrafugia Transition is the most serious attempt in the history of aviation to build a car that is also a functional aircraft. Not a concept, not a prototype, but a vehicle that received special airworthiness certification from the FAA along with regulatory exemptions that allowed it to pursue road legality, two regulatory achievements that no previous flying car had managed simultaneously. It drives on roads using its rear wheels for propulsion and transforms into an aircraft by unfolding its wings, a process that takes under a minute before taking off from a conventional airport runway. Its range as an aircraft is 400 miles. Its road performance is unremarkable. The combination of the two modes in a single vehicle required engineering compromises in both directions. It is a worse car than a car and a worse aircraft than an aircraft, but it is one of the few vehicles ever developed to function as both a road-legal car and a certified aircraft. The company that built it was eventually acquired by a Chinese automotive group, and the vehicle never reached meaningful production. What it proved before that happened was that the regulatory barriers to a flying car were solvable. The engineering barriers were harder, and the market barriers harder still. But the legal question of whether a car could also be a plane was answered definitively in the affirmative for the first time in the history of either category. Which raises an interesting point. Building a flying car turned out to be possible. Building one that people actually wanted to buy was much harder.